Welcome, 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 everyone. We are so glad you are here to join us for our topic today, which is all about trauma-informed responses to challenging behavior. We hope that you've been able to join us across this series. This is our last session of this series. If you want to go ahead and pop in the chat who you are, where you're from, you all are family at this point. So we want to hear from you. We want to say hi. It is so sad, Cynthia, but it's never goodbye. And we can't wait to be back up and running with Series 2.0.
All right. Chat is flying. This is one of my favorite parts. Um, Hi, we are so happy to see all of you. Very spread out today. We're just going to give another minute as people are popping into the room with us, and then we will scoot on forward. All right, Julia, I don't know. I think you might have a friend in the chat. They said, it's Julia,
Oh my
but
gosh.
I've lost it. We'll find you at the end when we review the chat. All right. Good. Okay. Thank you all for your introductions. As you keep putting those in the chat, we're just going to push forward and we'll introduce ourselves too. As Julia said, we have been running this series for the last 6 months, and honestly, it has been such a treat to have this time to spend together with you, to hear different voices from programs in the field, and to really share wisdom and learning in this community. So we're really grateful that you have come. Either to some or all of these. We are curious if this is your first time in one of the webinars for this series. If you could just let us know in the chat, we're just would love to hear that from you. Or if you've come a lot of times, we want to know that too. My name is Kelly McDermott, and I am part of the faculty team at the Thrive Center at Georgetown University. I'm a clinical social worker by training, and my specializations are in early childhood mental health and trauma. I am always excited to talk to practitioners about their work, to hear about the ways that they are showing up every day to support young kids and the grown-ups who take care of them. And I also am very firmly rooted in the field as a practitioner still. So I hope that Julia and I will be able to share some of our stories today too. We invite you to share stories and wisdom in the chat. And we also will hear from Jennifer a little bit later on today. But before she introduces herself, I'm going to pass the mic over to Julia to say hi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Sales. Like Kelly, I am a licensed mental health clinician by training. I started my career in the field. Always have to shout out ABCD Head Start in Boston, where I was a mental health consultant and was able to learn so much from the gracious teachers, where I messed up a million times and they still were inviting me back. So love Head Start, deeply rooted in Head Start, and excited to be here with you all today to talk about this really important topic and some of the deep connections that we want to carry through, especially as we're thinking about those of you who may be starting the program year here. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Jennifer. Jennifer, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, we're so glad you're able to join us here today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Parientes. I am a disability and mental health specialist for Parent Child Incorporated. That is a Head Start program here in San Antonio, Texas. We are throughout Bexar County, and I am excited to be here also as a Georgetown. I'm also part of the student, one of the students at the practical certification, and with Julia as one of my professors. So That's me.
Jennifer, thank you. Just some quick housekeeping. If you all have any specific questions as we go, please feel free to use the Q&A. We have a large group, and so sometimes questions get lost in the chat. If you use the Q&A function, we'll make sure that we answer all of those questions. Everyone will be receiving a certificate at the end of this session, as well as an email that will go out in the next few days that has a link to all of the previous sessions in case you missed those, as well as a recording link of today's session and a fun little freebie, a fun poster that we've created as a resource for you all to be able to take with you and use.
Beautiful. All right. So we are talking about hard things today. We are not going to go deep into trauma or trauma content, but when you start to put things like trauma, trauma-informed care, challenging behavior, and reflection together, it can stir some things up in us. So we wanted to just give a minute to say out loud that even if you are super used to having conversations about all of these things, depending on where you are in time and in space, the way that they hit you today might feel surprising or unexpected. And so we want to give space for that, give grace for that, but also to encourage people to do what you need to do to feel okay on the other side of that screen. That can be micro movements that you see listed on the screen here. We also recommend kind of moving your body if that feels like a good fit. But above all, our hope is that you will find a relationship with a trusted friend, family member, or colleague that you can kind of talk to about your experience or what you're thinking about or what it's bringing up for you when you move through this webinar so that we can kind of practice what we preach here and elevate that relationships with other people are the strongest buffer to stress that we have at our disposal. If you notice that you would like to just be all done with the webinar and maybe revisit it later, like Julia said, that is an option. The recording will be provided for you. And we want to think about taking care of ourselves in this moment. All right, so with that, hear from you in the chat. What is trauma? What are you seeing in your work? What are you bumping into in your role, in the communities where you work, in support of the children and families that your program serves? What is happening out there? Okay, interpersonal violence, parents in jail, immigration issues, increased anger. Okay, I'm seeing behavior. It's already in. All right.
A lot of loss, Kelly,
Yeah.
a lot of family separation, removals, unemployment, substance use, migration, death, food instability, immigration, and just general trauma, just sort of some of the
Yeah.
general hardships.
All right. Thank you for putting those in the room. We are not going to talk about examples of trauma so much, but what we did want to provide was a universal definition that we like to use to describe trauma. And what we bump into a lot of the time is somebody will describe an experience like what we're having in the chat here and say, this child went through this, or this family is experiencing that, and follow it up with a question of, is that trauma? And so a specific experience isn't necessarily trauma. All of these things that you've listed in the chat, we would say are potentially traumatic, but what really determines whether or not someone is experiencing trauma is the impact that it has on them. So we like to say when events overwhelm a child's ability to cope, this can age up to be anyone's age, right? Or deal with what has happened, that's when we start thinking about trauma. Some good things to keep in mind are that this is not going to mean a specific incident or event is going to be traumatic in the same or have the same impact on everyone, right? So somebody who was sitting right next to me experiencing the same exact event might have a very different takeaway and experience than I did. And some of the things that we like to think about when we're holding that context are the developmental age of the child. A lot of times people think that really young children can't experience trauma and adversity or they're spared in some way. But what we actually know is that the younger you are, the more susceptible to trauma or events being traumatic you are because there's just not as much coping and resiliency factors that have been able to be built up and developed in such a short life, right? The type and severity of the event. So we're going to talk about relationships, but you'll see here whether or not a trauma is interpersonal. So when something happens in the crux of a relationship or in a core caregiving relationship versus something that is externalized, like a natural disaster or a car accident, that has different impacts on children. How kids already know how to cope, what their style looks like, the strengths that they bring, the relationships that they have that are able to buffer. So thinking about support system, and then of course, just the meaning making that they have of the experience itself. So when we're determining whether or not something is traumatic, we need a lot more information than just what the event was. And sometimes that happens through our observation and getting to know kids and families. And one of the things that we want to say today or hope or offer is permission to slow down a little bit and learn about the experience of another, right? To really embrace an opportunity to be curious and reflective and open to perspective that other people bring that's rooted in their own experience. All right. So a lot of these things were already highlighted in the chat. Thank you all so much. What we know is that behavior is impacted by trauma. And the reason for that is because trauma impacts the brain, right? We're going to talk about the flip side of things that we can do to help support the brain. But so many of the messages that we receive in early childhood work is that we are brain builders, right? There's lots of ways that we help to support healthy development. And there are also some things that can make that development go a little bit off track. Trauma is one of them. And so we notice children have a hard time managing their regulation system. And if you came to our regulation session, you will remember, I hope, that the expectation for very young children is not to have any capacity to self-regulate, right? As they hit 4 and 5 and 6, they might have emerging self-regulation skills that they can utilize with support, right? But when we start to see that show up, that's often for kids who have had many consistent and repeated patterns of co-regulation in their relationships, right? So thinking back to experiences that children have as one way to understand their regulation patterns is absolutely relevant, right? Sometimes those experiences are linked to adversity or potentially traumatic events. So it's just another opportunity to be curious. Other things that get disrupted are the ability to pay attention and stay focused. Again, we're couching all of this in developmental expectations. So the way that we expect a 3-year-old to pay attention and stay focused is not necessarily the way that we expect an adult to be able to pay attention and stay focused. Although I imagine some of us feel like we have days, minutes, years where we are more connected with 3-year-old expectations around attention and focus and some of the things on this list. But when we're thinking about children who are impacted, we have expectations, hopefully really rooted in good social emotional development principles for what it looks like when kids are on track with things like following directions and managing their impulsivity, building friendships, and then trusting others and entering into relationships. If at the core, it doesn't feel like those things are online the way that we would expect, it is a good time to wonder if a child's experience, right, the things that they have gone through might be shaping that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The other piece that we wanted to hit on is the impact of trauma on learning. So A lot of times, children are in our care. Many of you are working in some kind of early childhood education program. A lot of you are in Head Starts. We see you in the chat calling that out. And so when children come into programs, they are there to learn, right? And when kids have experienced trauma that's really disrupted the things that we talked about in that last slide, learning is harder, right? Being able to take in concepts or experiences and help them stick when your brain is not online in the way that facilitates learning means that it can take a lot more repeated repeats in practice for it to actually kind of sink in. This can give the um, adults uh an experience of their own frustration. Like, we've practiced this so many times, or I've told you so many times, and it feels like nothing I say works or nothing I do works. And you've had plenty of opportunities and it's still not working here. And so we want to really think about linking things like regulation, learning, prior experience, and felt safety, right, in our learning environments and in our relationships as an extension of the environment, right? And so we're going to talk through all of those things today. So before we move into more content, we wanted to just hear from you. We know that we can't talk to you the way that we wish we could in this format, but what is it like out there working with children and families who have experienced trauma? You've already named in the chat that behavior has been impacted. You are seeing challenging behavior. And a lot of the time, the people who are sitting in this Zoom room with us are the containers, right? How are you feeling? It is a lot to hold. So I see heartbreaking, confused, overwhelmed. Yeah, it's hard. Sometimes I don't feel like I'm equipped. I don't know what to do, right? That is something that is such a through line in conversations that I have as a mental health consultant and as a clinician is this like weight of the world question of what happens if I can't do enough, or how do I know what to do enough, or even the more heartbreaking, I know I can't do enough. I'm sad, I'm burdened. Yes, it's disruptive. I feel helpless, right? And when we're operating from a place of these feelings, right, which make total sense, we can offer tons of validation and normalization for this. When we're talking about where healing happens, right, where trauma-informed care lives, that's something that we embody and that we offer through our relationships. And so all of these things color the way those look. And Julia's going to walk us through kind of thinking through principles of trauma-informed care. But I want us to also hold on to the humanity of our experience. Thank you all so much for putting that in the chat for us to hold in a real way.
Ooh, let's all take a big, deep breath because this work is hard. It's emotional. It takes a toll on our body, and it's hopeful. We get to show up. We get to support and shape brains. You all are spending more waking hours with these young children than they do with anyone else when they are in your programs, in your care, when they are with you. And we have a massive ability to be able to shape some of those patterns that start to let kids know, I'm okay. It's okay here. I'm safe. Even if those behaviors are so big and so challenging, we can show up in a way that says, I've got you. I'm here with you. And that's part of the core of trauma-informed care. We want to hold that. Trauma-informed care is not a set of checklists. How nice would that be if we were like, check, 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 trauma-informed, we're good, let's go. We know that that's not what it is. Trauma-informed care is a way of being. It's a way that we see our programs and our systems. It's a way that we interact and engage in our relationships, not just with children, but with families, our colleagues, our communities. And so we want to hold that as we think about what trauma-informed care really is and how it supports all of the people within early education and care systems. So we're going to start by thinking about trauma reactive. And when we are talking about trauma reaction, it's helpful to think about the pieces that we're going to go over on this slide, we can think about them at a programmatic level. So as I talk through this, you may be thinking, that's my program. I live this every day, and it's not just a single child, it's not just a single classroom, it's the entire program feeling this way. Some of you may be like, nope, it's one classroom. It's coming to mind right now, or it's one teacher, staff member, it's one child that I'm thinking about, it's one family that's coming to mind. The nice thing about this is it encompasses all of that. So we know that when relationships and environments are trauma reactive, it can elicit a lot of different feelings and ways that we respond and react. And one of the biggest ways that we start to notice trauma reaction at a programmatic level, through our own practices as educators or practitioners in the field, is things start to be fragmented. So I'm doing one thing over here, someone else is doing something totally different over here, and there is not communication about what is happening. Has anyone experienced that before? It's like you are in totally different books. You're not even in the same book, let alone the same chapter, right? And so we miss those opportunities for that connection, for that communication that we know can really support predictability and consistency. Oftentimes, there's this overwhelming feeling of being overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed as a child and I'm showing you through my behavior. The family's overwhelmed. The teacher is overwhelmed. And when we go to get support from people like our mental health consultant, our disability specialists, our directors, our program leaders, they are overwhelmed too. It feels like the entire system is in this sort of state of chaos or overwhelm. Oftentimes, when we're in this space, it leads us to be fear driven. So how many of you, this is a child-specific example, but how many of you have worked with a child who has really big behaviors or really big unsafe behaviors, and they happen a lot across the day? And you're with this child, and when they're doing really well, you're like, don't look at them, don't breathe near them, nobody say hi to them, they are doing so well, you leave them be, you let them do their activity, they're doing well, I'm getting a break for a second, shh, right? That is a response that's related to trauma reaction. We know that when kids are doing really well, when they're regulated, when they're engaged, that's the time we want to be banking up our relationship with them. And oftentimes when we're in a trauma reactive environment, we almost say, I'm scared to do anything because I don't want to set off another behavior. I don't want to unintentionally activate this child. We also know that when we are in a trauma reactive space, we are doing just that. We are reacting. So we are not thinking preventatively. Oftentimes we feel like firefighters who are going from one problem to the next problem, to the next problem, to the next problem. And we are constantly trying to put out those fires versus slowing down and saying, what do we need to do to make sure the fires aren't starting in the first place? And when we're in that trauma reactive space, it can be really hard to do that, to slow down, to have those moments where we can start to think, what are we going to do to be proactive and show up to support that? And when we put all of these pieces together, there's a lack of safety. Young kids don't feel safe. Staff don't feel safe, program leaders do not feel safe, and oftentimes families do not feel safe. And we know for young children to thrive, for staff to thrive, for families to thrive, we need to feel safe. When safety is not in place, it's really hard to show up in an attuned way in our relationships, in a supportive way, in a responsive way, in a consistent way, in a predictable way. So what do we do about that? This is not judgment. If you're sitting here on this call right now and you're like, this is me, this is my program, that's okay. The very first step is noticing this and acknowledging it. When we're able to notice an acknowledgement, that starts to open up room to have a conversation, to think about small steps that we take to get out of the trauma reactive space and start to move towards the safe, supportive, and healing space. And the 4 R's can really help us do that. So the 4 R's come from, come from SAMHSA, and they start with really thinking about how are we understanding? It starts with realizing, how are we understanding that trauma does impact young children, that it impacts families, that it impacts staff, that it impacts communities? We know the research out there tells us that young children are more likely to experience some type of adverse early childhood experience, at least 33% of all young children. So if you're thinking right now, I don't know if people in my program have experienced trauma, the chances are yes. Whether they are showing it through their behavior, whether you know the experience, really doesn't matter. What we want to be thinking about through our trauma-informed lens is that we are showing up in a way that is going to support every single child, every single family, every single staff member, whether we know their experiences or not, because so often we don't know those experiences. We also want to hold that we like to say here at Georgetown, we don't talk about trauma without also talking about growth and healing. So we know that hard things happen, scary things happen, and we have an amazing ability to think about how healing also happens. We want to make sure that we're recognizing how are we understanding how these deep experiences impact a child's meaning making, how they impact their sense of self, how they impact their behavior. We want to start to shift and say, what's happened to this child? What are those experiences that have told them I'm bad? What are those experiences that have made them feel like I need to fly through this roof to keep myself safe? I need to show up and throw this chair in order to protect myself. There's a reason why behind it. And when we slow down and we start to ask ourselves, what's happened to this child? It opens up space to have a deeper understanding that there are these patterns of relationships and experiences that they may have had that are driving this behavior. It is not an intentional choice to have a big unsafe behavior. Something is happening in the neurosystem that says, I need to be safe, keep me safe. This is a really big shift from what's wrong with this child. So oftentimes internally, we may have this thought sometimes, what's wrong with this child? What's wrong with this family? When we have that mindset, it really shuts down the ability to be curious. It shuts down and blames, it shames. Oftentimes there's a lot of judgment around it. And so when we shift into what's happened to this child, we have a lot more openings to think around what is the system that's impacted this child? What are those relationships, those environments? What's happening in this community? We want to make sure that we are seeing those big challenging behaviors or unsafe behaviors or tricky behaviors through a lens that says what I'm seeing makes sense based off of brain science. I know this child is dysregulated in this moment. It could be because of an experience of trauma, or it could be because of something else, but something is happening in their body that is making it difficult for them to be regulated, to show up in a way that is safe. And so what do I, as the adult, need to do to help support them in those moments? We want to respond in ways. We want this to be at a teacher level, a practitioner level, all the way up to a system program level. We want to build those systems that really help to support adults in having these skills and how they can respond and how they can prevent, so that we offer many, many opportunities for children to heal. And we also really want to think about resisting re-traumatization. And so when we talk about resisting re-traumatization, we know that for many young children, they are coming in with relational patterns. They are coming in with relational expectations of how things should go or how they are used to things going. Sometimes that's really positive. I'm a baby, and when I cry, I'm used to my caregiver coming and picking me up and soothing me. We know some kids come in, though, some infants may come in and they say, when I cry and I cry, and then I just stop crying because there's not someone there to come and soothe me. And so when we think about resisting re-traumatization, we're really thinking about how we implement those systems to make sure that staff have the skills, they have the support that they need to manage their own stress, that they can show up in a regulated way, that they're aware of this information, and that they're aware of these patterns, and that their responses are responses that promote healing versus responses that may actually re-traumatize a child or a family or a staff member. We at Georgetown and our friends at UCSF, shout out to Vilma Reyes and Gina Sampson. If you know them, you love them as we do, think that that's not enough. We want to resist re-traumatization. We want to make sure that kids are better that they are not just not traumatized when they leave our programs, that they're actually better off, that they've grown, that there's safety, that there's some healing that has occurred. And so when relationships and environments are safe, we know that children and adults and the entire culture of the program can feel more integrated. There's communication. We are on the same page. There's teamwork. We're working together. We're using reflection. We're getting curious about what is happening, what's happening for this child, what's happening for this teacher, what are the responses, where are they matching up, and where are they not. We're thinking about how we're collaborating. Are we pulling in our multidisciplinary approach? Do we have our mental health consultant coming in? Have we pulled in our disabilities and mental health coordinator? Are we having the director in? And most importantly, are we including the family in this conversation too? We know that when we are really focused on moving towards a place of safety, that there's more flexibility, there's more equity and inclusion, and that we can be more preventative and growth oriented. And this is where healing happens. So when we want to think about shifting into a space of healing, we really want to hold, what does this connection look like? How are we thinking about all these important pieces? And we are so excited to have Jennifer to share a little bit about what trauma-informed care means and looks like in her program. So Jennifer, I know you did a quick introduction, but can you tell us a little bit more about your role within your program?
Yes, so the role that I currently hold within my program is as a disabilities and mental health specialist. I go out to the classrooms and it includes observing children in their classroom environments, collaborating with the teachers and the families, and helping them to understand what may be underneath that challenging behavior, and then also connecting those families with additional services that they may need. A large part of my role is supporting the adults who support the children. So I go in, I help educators reflect on what the child may be communicating and identifying those strategies that they need to implement in their classrooms to really strengthen the relationships, promote some of that regulation, whether it be the co-regulation between the teacher and the child, maybe the child's regulation, and then increasing the child's ability to be able to participate successfully, like within their classroom.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I'm curious for you because I think there's lots of different types of roles, and sometimes what you may be asked to support doesn't always match what your role is or the perspective you come from. So can you share a little bit about when you're brought in for support, what are most of the people you're supporting typically hoping for, and how does this match or not what you do, what you envision your role to be?
Definitely, you completely summed it up. When I'm brought in, a lot of times people are already feeling, the teachers are already feeling overwhelmed, the parents are feeling overwhelmed, and they are hoping for an immediate solution, right? So sometimes I come in and they're like, "Well, how do we stop this behavior?" Or can you fix this?" Because they're dealing with hitting, biting, screaming, throwing objects, running away, and understandably, they want everyone in their classroom to feel safe. And so that doesn't always match how I see my role, right? My job is to not just fix a child or to simply make a behavior disappear, right? My role is to partner with that teacher, with that family, and really observe those patterns, consider really what the child is trying to communicate, and then helping collaboratively across whether it be the teachers, the staff that are there, the directors, the parents, the families, and helping them to create an environment in which that child can ultimately feel safe and not be showing these behaviors. Although I do still go in and want to set those clear limits and address those behaviors, those unsafe behaviors, right? But I want to do so in a way that I'm still connecting there with the child. So through my trauma informed practice, I don't want to ignore that, yes, there's boundaries, right? We don't hit, we don't kick, we don't bite, things like that. But we want to make sure that we're responding to those behaviors without shame or without fear or disconnection, because ultimately we're all there for the kids. So I'm not a fixer.
Thank you, Jennifer. I can imagine that sometimes that's a little tricky, right? I think sometimes when the behaviors are so big or they're at that level, people feel desperate sometimes. They feel like just make it go away, just make it change. And so I love that you're elevating the idea of your role is really there to think about supporting the capacity of that teacher, really thinking about partnering with them and the family and not ignoring the child. We support them too, but making sure the people who are so consistent in their life are able to show up and understand and support what's happening as well. Can you share a little bit more about how using a trauma-informed lens or approach has supported your work?
So through my learning of what trauma-informed care is and through my trauma-informed lens, I've really tried and really worked in shifting that information, shifting that perspective with our teachers. It goes back to the previous slides about a lot of times it's what's wrong with this child? Like, what is going on? Where it's more like, well, let's take a step back and think about what happened to this child? What is this family going through? What is the child experiencing? And then it leads back to me believing that behavior is ultimately a communication, right? This child is really trying to communicate something to you, whether it's maybe the room is just too loud, they're not feeling safe. I'm afraid you're going to leave me. I'm afraid as a child that my teacher is going to leave me. And so those feelings then, appear to be aggression, withdrawal, refusing, crying, running away. Whereas through my trauma-informed lens, it does help me to remain curious rather than, showing the teachers, well, let's talk more. Don't necessarily be so reactive. And then it encourages me to really consider, what is the child's relationships to everyone that they are in, that they're with? Where are they at developmentally? Where is the family at? Where are they at? Developmentally, what things do they need? And then what is the ability of the communication skills that the child has? And then also to ultimately the classroom environment, and just making sure that the adults themselves too recognize that their regulation matters. And so it's also like really taking a step back and helping the teacher to understand they need to remain calm, predictable, and emotionally available so that they're able to lend that feeling back to that child so that they can then remain calm until they begin to really work with the child.
Thank you, Jennifer. You're getting lots of hearts popping up here. I'm already seeing in the chat. Can I have your contact info? I'd love to talk with you. Do you have any examples of how a trauma-informed lens has been helpful for supporting a child who is having a really hard time or having bigger behaviors?
Okay, so I know I'm very quick. It's not a full day webinar, but one in particular that I know a lot of times in our program, and I'm sure across several programs, is a lot of kids have struggles with transitions, right? Whether it's time to clean up, it's time to go to the next activity. We're seeing them cry, we're seeing them throw materials, and a lot of times it's viewed as them being defiant, right, or unwilling to follow directions. That's always the go-to, like, oh, they're just not listening. And so it's really taking time to slow down, look a little bit more closely, and notice that those transitions may be all of a sudden, right? We're not preparing them for that next step. And so really coming together as a team and helping the teacher understand, okay, let's try giving, some advanced warnings, using visual schedules, offering, appropriate choices, and assigning just a familiar adult that they feel that they can provide that calm support during that difficult transition. The teacher can come in to say, you're safe, I'm here to help you. I know it's hard to stop playing, but first we clean up and then we go outside. So a lot of times the teacher's like, well, I can say that, but I still need them to do. But I remind them that when you say things like that, you're still trying to meet that expectation, right? Ultimately, they have to clean up, they've got to go outside, right? That's just what we all have to do. But just reminding them that it's okay to manage what they're feeling in that difficult moment, but understanding that they are still safe. And so I've seen that. And so then over time, that child did begin to move through their transitions less with less distress. So the behavior did not change because the behavior wasn't going to change because the adults kept remaining stricter, rather than it changed because they now understood the child's need, right? They need that predictability. They need to be forewarned, right? And so that skill building was then met. And so it decreased a lot of the challenges that they had in that classroom.
Thank you, Jennifer. You have so many good little gems in there of our trauma-informed practices that are best practice for all kids, and we know really support those kids who need that extra boost, who need that healing. Are you able to share any of the examples of how you have reframed or supported unlearning that might help others think about trauma informed? So sometimes we come with different ways of thinking. You mentioned it just briefly there, where the idea of like, well, maybe we need to double down and get stricter versus thinking about maybe we need to hold that feeling or that experience or shift how we're showing up. Do you have any other examples?
Yeah, so one of the big things that I have I've been with PCI for about five going on 5 years now. And a lot of that language of the challenging behaviors is used a lot, right? So I've kind of tried to change the shift, and we have early Head Start and Head Start, right? So a challenging behavior could be potty training, right? So like we have early Head Start. So it's really that's a challenge, but that's a given, right? So really trying to change that language into um what big feelings are they trying to communicate? Right. So the behavior is that communication that they're trying to communicate something to you. Is so really changing that mindset of, well, everything can be challenging, right? I got to learn how to tie my shoe. I'm 4, 5 years old. I got to learn that's challenging, right? But when those big feelings and those big behaviors are happening, it's really understanding what are they trying to communicate to me that I may not be understanding. And I need to take a step back and I really need to shift my thinking and saying, okay, how do I help this child? And another way that we've kind of shifted is moving from consequences of, oh, if you don't pick up the blocks, you're not gonna be able to go on to the next activity. But it's really taking a step back to understand is can they pick up the blocks? Like, do they understand where the blocks go? And so it's really understanding that we not to discipline a child into having regulation or communication because they may not have that developed yet. So it's really just taking a step back and not understanding that, oh, challenging behaviors are out there. It's just really just understanding like what are the big feelings trying to relay to us? So
I love that, Jennifer. In our last couple minutes with you here, can you share? We know that we can't do it alone, and that when we have the support of leadership, that can really help the implementation of trauma-informed practices or trauma-informed care within our program. Can you share a little bit about how that's showing up in your program?
So I do have a really great support system when it comes to the leadership that we have here at PCI, whether it's from my immediate supervisor all the way up to our CEO. They do play a really important role. They allow us or myself to be able to provide training to the teachers, be able to give me the kind of the autonomy to go into the classrooms to say, hey, I'm learning this, let's try this, or really just giving me the ability to be out there and supporting each individual teacher the way that they need to be supported as well, and not just being like, oh, it has to just be this one way. And really understanding that just along with our kids, teachers teach a different way. Each teacher teaches a different way. It's just trying to figure out how to really help and support them. And then program wide, we do have a really good wellness program here. We do support our teachers a lot. We've implemented some policies and procedures that allow them to really take some time if needed. If they are feeling unregulated and they need a moment, they can take a step out and really take some time, whether it's to have a quick snack or maybe a drink or, just maybe take a walk outside to kind of get back to that regulated state, to be able to go back into their classroom. So that has been something that we have implemented program wide that has really, really worked out for us. Teachers really appreciate that ability to be like, I need a moment. Can you help? And so whoever's there available can really go in and see that and then say, yeah, go ahead. And so ultimately, our leadership here is really, really big on trauma informed care, and it does help to do my job better.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Of course,
We could chat with you all
all
day, never
day.
enough time, but thank you for sharing some of those gems and words of wisdom and showing that we can do this.
Yes.
Every program can be trauma informed. So thank you. Catherine, if we can pop the slides back up, that would be great. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Catherine. Okay. Um, and thank you to Jennifer again. Like, this is where we could just spend the rest of the time showering you with gratitude for imparting so many wisdom, like nuggets of wisdom into what you shared. One of the things that I think you led us right to is this slide. So, really holding that kind of traditional views about discipline, child rearing, early childhood education, even. How many of you are in the field now and think back to how you were trained and see like massive differences in the way that we actually practice today? Making sure that we are holding, messages that we received in our own families as we were growing up. Cultural traditions impact this, right? Who we are as individual people, the way that we have learned over time, definitely shows up in how we make meaning of things that we observe or relationships that we are part of. And so, one of the things that I loved that you shared is taking that step back and opening up a lens of curiosity, right? Being able to say, ooh, even though I am the adult, I don't necessarily know all the things. And for some people, being able to step back and do that is liberating. And for some people, that is terrifying, right? Like if I let go of even one modicum inch of control, then everything's going to unravel. And so being able, as someone who's supporting people who are supporting children, to say, okay, that makes sense. I understand where we're operating from. And I think that might be getting in the way of what you actually want to be happening in your relationship and in your environment with children. And so, being able to create some space to reflect on a safe way for the adults to move forward in relationship with children, that also kind of fosters that safety for the child is so lovely. The other thing that was like really popping for me is this idea that children do well when they can do well, right? That's kind of a universal assumption that I carry as a parent and as a clinician and as a human. Um, but sometimes that gets confused with children do well when they want to or if they want to. And so we place a lot of value and pressure on being able or a child just being able to like white knuckle and grit through really big feelings that they're experiencing and that you named and come out the other side doing what was hoped for them to do or was directed to them as an expectation by the adult. So being able to step back a little bit and to say, huh, safety is at the core of this interaction. How are we thinking about safety is the crux of trauma-informed practice, right? And I see this bubbles up. It's come up in the chat and in the Q&A. But what about a child who is displaying behavior that feels unsafe? And we're worried about the safety of the other children in the room and the adults in the room. What about them? And then we get set into this kind of us versus them mentality. So it's like us over here, and that child over there. And the more that we can come together, kind of linking arms around a trauma-informed approach and say, no, it's all of us together, right? It's their safety and it's our safety because everybody is entitled to it. And when we hold that big behaviors, even when they're unsafe, are a big message of dysregulation that's rooted in brain science that communicates that they or perceives that there is some kind of threat a child is responding to, can be one area that we take a little bit of a step back and stay curious about what that might be. This was also put into a poster. As those of you who have returned through multiple sessions know, we try to put some kind of something together for you to take and feel like is tangible. So this is what we have today. David, if you could drop those in the chat, there's one that has a little bit more color on it and one that is printer friendly for those of you who are being conscious of ink levels. All right. And so we're going to shift now to thinking about relationships because everything that we have talked to today has been rooted in relationship in some way, shape, or form. So all of the emotional experiences that we have when we think about supporting kids and families and each other, all of the frustrations that we have, or the senses of injustice or worries about our own competence or just exhaustion, right? All of those things bubble into how we show up in our relationships too. So when we're thinking about trauma-informed practices, the other crux of this is that experience shapes how people show up in their relationships, in their environments, and through their behavior. That's absolutely true for children. And we have to make sure that we're holding that perspective for ourselves. So, just as much as we're curious about someone else's experience, it's so helpful to be curious and reflective about what's going on for us. And as we pivot to think about kind of a developmental trajectory for kids, we want to really sit in this place of paying attention to how we're showing up in the relationships because we as the adults are the ones who are in charge. We are the ones who hold the power. We are the ones who have more practice, and we are the ones who have access to the skills that we're hoping children are going to be able to learn through their interactions, relationships, and support that we provide. So when we're holding that, as a framework, we are going to embrace this idea that we learn, we grow, we hurt, and we heal in the context of relationships. And sometimes this can feel overwhelming, and sometimes this can feel incredibly hopeful. And I have found that where I land on that depends on kind of how I come at it in the moment, how I'm feeling in that moment. And my reaction here gives me a lot of information. Today, I'm happy to report that I feel super hopeful about this message, that I have lots and lots of opportunities to figure out ways that I can be at least a drop in the bucket of a child's healing journey and to contribute to growth that they are inevitably going to have in the time that we have together.
So where do we start with this, Kelly? We go back to starting with regulation. And those of you who've been with us for the last 6 months know we have a whole session that is recorded and will be shared out in the follow-up email that you can check back and think about regulation and how we go deeper into that. But we know that relational safety, whether you're working with a young child, whether you're working with a family, a staff member, someone in the community, starts with a regulated adult. We have to be thinking about adult well-being. And Kelly and I like to say adult well-being and trauma-informed care are not two separate things. They go hand in hand because in order to show up in a trauma-responsive and informed way in our practices and our policies and our procedures, we have to make sure that we are well as well. And we have a whole session on wellness too. So y'all, it all connects together. But we know that some of the practical pieces that go into relational safety, Jennifer already highlighted for us, things like offering choice. We know when young children have experienced trauma, oftentimes they have a need for control. There's been a big experience of loss of control, and they are trying to regain some of that control. So offering genuine choices, offering genuine opportunities for power across the day in a way that is developmentally appropriate and relational is a huge strategy. We want to think about how we offer co-regulation to all young children. Like Kelly said, this is the space that we live in early childhood. We know that young children need to be able to inhale our calm or our energy when they're dysregulated. And so making sure that we are close by, making sure that we are co-regulating both preventatively and showing up in a space where we can do that in moments when the behavior is big or unsafe. We want to highlight music, rhythmicity, movement. All of those are huge for being able to support all young children's development. They are cornerstones of how we think about building the capacity to heal from trauma. And so when we are able to do this in relationship, we're able to support ourselves as adults. How many of you out there are like, I feel better when I go for a walk, or I listen to my favorite song, or I'm able to move my body? These opportunities across the day are chances for us to regulate as adults while we are connecting with the kids that we are teaching and caring for and loving. loving on. We want to make sure that we're promoting friendship skills and peer connection. We know that oftentimes, especially for kids who have some of the bigger unsafe behaviors, peers can start to shift away a little bit. They're like, I'm not so sure. Last time you hit me with the big block, I didn't love that. And so, how are we preventatively really thinking about how we're scaffolding and having lots of opportunities to promote those emerging friendship skills with some adult support, some adult co-regulation there so that they are successful interactions when we're thinking peer to peer? We want to think about using a zone defense in the classroom. So if you know that you have some kids who are really working on their regulation capacity, how are we making sure that we are close by? We're in earshot. We're able to understand and hear what is happening so that we can come in and do that good co-regulation before the behavior gets to a place where it's unsafe. How are we spreading ourselves out? How are we really thinking about intentionally about where we are? And that really aligns with our proximity for co-regulation. And we want to provide lots and lots and lots of positive descriptive praise. So we know that oftentimes young children who are having a harder time, who are showing us through their behavior that their feelings are big, there's something else happening there for them, hear a lot of redirects. And the redirects can be done really nicely. We use walking feet. Kelly, we use walking feet. Jennifer, safe hands, Jennifer. Jennifer, safe hands. Use your safe hands, Jennifer. Walking feet. Don't forget, walking feet. We're getting ready to go, right? That's done in an appropriate way, but when that's all they hear, we know that oftentimes they start to internalize that message if I'm constantly being redirected. So how are we really leaning into that 5-to-1 ratio? Thank you, Irene. And thinking about how we are saying Kelly comes up with the coolest magnetile buildings. She is a builder. Wow, look at that. She knows how to build so tall. Kelly, how do you know how to build so tall? Or Jennifer has really, really fast feet. She runs so fast on that playground. Jennifer is so fast. She's so quick, right? How are we able to really think about the strengths that each child brings? How are we able to highlight that in relationships? And this goes for adults too. A lot of times we're hearing about the things we could be doing better, the things that we want to be seeing done more intentionally. How are we really elevating the things that we're doing really, really well? And last but not least, we want to make sure that we play. We want to encourage play. We know play is all children's first language, and we want to think about how play is supported.
Great. And as we promised, we are going to land here, back at the brain. So just like trauma has an impact on the brain, so do the things that we do on the other side of it, right? So repeated positive experiences that are couched in a relationship with us, build the brain. And those things are more effective than the things that take away a child's sense of safety, right? Those are the things that we can help them hold on to. Those are the things that can shape templates and expectations for the next place that they go in a way that will be meaningful and support healing for a very, very long time. One of the things that happens when children experience trauma is they start to believe things about themselves, the grown-ups who are around them, who like should hopefully be caring for them and the world as a whole. And so a lot of times what I like to do when I'm meeting with educators or others in the field is say, what do we want our children to feel about who they are and what they deserve and where they belong in the world? And a lot of times you will see that on the right side of this column. Those are the things that come up. But when children have experienced trauma, they oftentimes are living in these messages on the left. And the way that we move them into that right side of the column is through our relationships. And so I offer this as a supplement to that handout that we put together around a trauma-informed lens, because these are the things that we can hold on to keep us going when it feels hard, right? To say, no, I am being intentional. I am, buckling up and showing this child that I will continue to greet them and appreciate them and see the things that they do well and like them on the other side of hard moments, because my goal in the context of their whole little life is to get them a little bit closer to internalizing the messages that I want them to know about who they are, what they can expect from grown-ups, and where they fit in the world. All right. So, trauma-informed care is for everyone. We talked a lot today about kids who have experienced trauma, benefiting from these practices, but the truth is they're just best universal practices for everyone. And the more that we apply them universally, the more likely we are to reach kids and families who need them, even if we don't know that they need them. When we pick and choose when we're going to be trauma-informed or use a trauma-informed approach, we really risk people falling through the cracks because their presentation wasn't as loud or as big, or the experience that they had wasn't disclosed to us. So again, we want to cast a wide net, and we want to wrap around kids, families, and each other with this perspective universally. All right, in the next minute or two, we just want to name that a lot of you are here from Head Start. And the NPRM was released, and there are questions about what that means. And we're not going to get into that in the next 30 seconds. But what I do want to say is that when we started this series, we did it because we feel strongly about bringing the principles and ideas and orientation and stance of mental health consultation to a broad audience, right? Let's support challenges that are happening in programs, and give people an opportunity to reflect and reframe their thinking, because we feel passionately about mental health consultation. That passion comes from seeing it work in evidence, both through like research and studies, and also in our own anecdotal experience as clinicians, consultants, practitioners. And it is not driven by performance standards, although mental health consultation has for a long time been an expectation within those performance standards. But what we know is that we are going to continue showing up and doing this work regardless of what those performance standards say, because it's best practice for kids, families, and programs. So we are still going to be here, and we are hoping that more people will join us in this work so that we can link arms, find our friends, and regardless of what happens, not all of these things are in our control. We are going to pay attention to the things that we do have control over. All right, so as you know, we do have a practical certificate course around infant and early childhood mental health consultation. And so we just want to make sure that people know that's not going anywhere. We have a cohort that's starting up in October. And if you want to learn more about that, you can scan this QR code or reach out to us. We're always happy to chat.
And Jennifer, in our last 10 seconds, you are in the actual first pilot cohort. Do you want to share just a glimpse about your experience?
10 out of 10, highly recommend. Just to kind of sum it up, a lot of the things that I do within my program, I needed a level of validation of like, oh, I am doing this okay. And like giving titles to things that I was like, oh, I didn't know. So yes, 10 out of 10 recommend. I really highly recommend if you are interested in doing this course. It is very beneficial to the work that we do.
All
Thank
right.
you, Jennifer. Huge thank you to Jennifer, to our back-end staff, Mercedes, David, Catherine, Samia. We could not do it without you. And a huge thank you to all of you for showing up on a Wednesday in August when things are so hectic and busy. We love you. We appreciate you. We see you. And we know the work you're doing every single day is supporting healing for all young children, especially those who may have experienced trauma. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.